Bruce Feldman now joining us. I'm off my soapbox now. I'm done ranting. Mr. Feldman, Mr. Connected. So, it's interesting. And I said this to start last hour. I said, listen, whenever you lose somebody, your girlfriend breaks up with you, your boyfriend breaks up with you, your college coach leaves you, a network loses a talented person, people have hurt feelings. You feel like you've been dumped. And I understand that. Like, you have a right, if somebody dumps you at the altar, to be sad. Like, Oklahoma fans have a right to be upset. So do Notre Dame fans. I think they'll both be fine. They're great programs. There's great coaches. But there is this whole thing. It's not that they left. It's how they left. Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley are kind of leaving the same way. Isn't the only difference one fan base thinks they can win a national title?
I'm going to make a different distinction here. So on the Brian Kelly part of it, I think one of the issues that some people have on this is they're still technically alive for the playoff.
That's right.
So coaches constantly preach, finish, all in, all those things. And if somehow, and it's not that far-fetched, there could be a couple of losses this weekend, Notre Dame could be in the playoff mix. Yeah. They legit have a shot. It's an outside shot, but to make the playoff, and Brian Kelly's gone. So the whole aspect of finish, and all the things coaches preach, this is hypocrisy. Now, some of the other stuff you said a minute ago, I do agree with. I mean, Nick Saban has paid a fortune. Nick Saban is underpaid compared to what he has done, not just for Alabama, but for that entire community, the university community, the state, quite honestly. Dabo Swinney, still also probably underpaid given what he has done to Clemson, the brand, the university, all those things. There are a bunch of other guys now who have gotten swept up because they're getting paid millions upon millions, and they're going to be disastrous hires.
Yeah.
And that's where the school and the boosters, they're out, and they've made bad investments, right? I think what has happened in this wave, and you mentioned Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker's done a really good job at Michigan State. I think what they've done is really they're investing in him to say, we believe he is going to be the next big thing.
Yeah.
And so they ponied up, and I think that is on former walk-on basketball player at MSU who has hit it big since. And look, these aren't like Jerry Jones, but I think for a lot of people who can't own pro sports teams right now, I think they see the investment of their alma mater. They have a connection of a feeling of ownership. And I think that's how they've done it.
Yeah, Dan Gilbert owns the Cavs. He's probably the biggest Michigan State booster. There's another one that's huge. There's three of them. And they're all sports fans. Like, sometimes your richest alums are not sports fans. It just happens that Michigan State's got 3 billionaire alums, and they're huge sports fans. That's a great point. One does own a pro team, two don't. And so they're like, this is kind of our...
They have a sense of ownership. They can be, as one football coach I know said, they can be the hot shot at their country club now. And it's like, look, that's a big deal. And if Mel leads Michigan State to the playoff or a national title, that investment will be very, very prudent.
So sometimes lost in all this is that we believe these big brands, Alabama, USC, Oklahoma, they've always got all great talent, and a new coach will come in and flip a switch. You don't think that's true for Lincoln Riley at USC. I believe you think it's a little bit more of a challenge.
I do, and it has nothing to do with Lincoln Riley. For Fox, I did the UCLA-USC game. And so I was around the USC program for a couple of days, and you'd look physically at them. I've lived out here, Colin, for 20 years. This was the worst-looking USC team kind of on the hoof since I've been out here. It's just very underwhelming. And look, there's reasons for that is when you've had basically a lame duck head coach, as Clay Helton has been for like 3 years, that undermines recruiting in a big way. And then I think what has also happened, and look, this is no fault of the assistants. It's no fault of the interim Dante Williams. I think that you had basically a lot of folks who feel like they've been independent contractors.
Yeah.
So there's been really shaky leadership at best. And so I think all those factors have conspired to a very, very average roster. I mean, I don't really care what the star system says of like, oh, this guy used to be a 5-star and this guy came in as a high 4-star. A lot of those guys were probably overrated because of they were committed to USC. And I'm not saying all of them were that way, but I think a bunch of them, that's how some of that stuff works from when you talk to enough coaches about it. So I think what Lincoln Riley is inheriting is a roster that needs a massive upgrade, right? There was Drake London. He's an All-American, but Drake London was on crutches for our UCLA game. He was, when he was out, they were way limited. And their defense, there's nothing close to Leonard Williams. There's no Troy Polamalu's. There's no Brian Cushing's there. No. So I think that is the biggest challenge. Now, what bodes well for him is Lincoln Riley has a huge name and reputation for developing offensive players, right? We've seen it, multiple Heisman guys, multiple first picks of the draft, cutting-edge offense. Guys are going to want to come play for him. They already do. A bunch of these Southern California kids were committed for the 2023 class. Guess where they're going to end up going, right? They're going to end up staying home now. The question will be how quickly can he, in part through the portal and in part through recruiting, can he elevate the defensive side of the ball and the offensive line? Because that is a huge issue.
Yeah, O-line for USC. Dreadful. It is. They have one NFL prospect of the 17 kids on scholarship. It is a disaster. It has been they've paid no attention to it.
What's good though there is, look, he is expected to bring Bill Bedenbaugh from Oklahoma. He's the reason why this isn't a regular air raid, because they have a really physical run game. They're very creative.
They do.
He's arguably the best offensive line coach in college football. If he comes out here as we expect, that is a huge coup, guys. That I think that will take care of some of the softness that you see in right now in this program.
Okay, so I hear, let's talk Brian Kelly to LSU. So, people can be upset, whatevs. Let's talk this. People have said he's a weird fit, kind of. Winning tends to solve fit. I mean, Nick Saban was not from Alabama. I always tend to think you win stuff. Pete Carroll, when he got the USC job, maybe people thought it was an awful hire. And it's like old NFL, kind of quirky guy. The quirkiness was perfect when he was winning, right? Like we all saw it as an asset. So let's just talk Brian Kelly, LSU. Will they win quick? How does it feel to you?
It feels a little odd, but like you said, I mean, Les Miles from Ohio, Saban's from West Virginia, and it was up in the Big Ten and spent a bunch of time. He bounced around, but I think Brian Kelly, don't underestimate him. He's a really smart coach. What you said, Notre Dame was a mess. Literally, it was a mess. The locker room was a mess. Everything was a mess, and he turned it into a legit, consistent playoff contender, right? And I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Also, I give him credit. He evolved in the job. And I think that
so did Harbaugh this year.
They did, yeah. And I think one of the things with Brian Kelly that maybe doesn't get said enough is Notre Dame job. 5 years at Notre Dame is a long time. It's like dog years at other places. He was there for 12 years, right? So that's an extensive amount of time. I think what is going to be interesting here is the area where Notre Dame has been best in the last decade is they've had great offensive lines.
Tremendous.
And right now, knowing the LSU roster really well, they were very average at best, if not worse than that this year. And their O-line room is seriously going to be depleted because a lot of those guys have played for a long time, and they're going to be out of eligibility. So if you're Notre Dame and if you're Brian Kelly, you're going to have to really hit the portal really, really hard because you don't have the bodies that you're going to inherit to be able to compete at a high level. Now, there's some really gifted defensive linemen. There's a bunch of really good receivers and a ton of really good defensive backs. I mean, there's talent on the roster. The O-line is a big concern. And the question I would put to you, Colin, is what is doing a good job for Brian Kelly? Doing a good job for him, if you don't win a national title within 4 years.
3, I'd say. They're not going to wait 4.
Yeah.
He'll get heat by year 2. I do think he'll win. But
let's win, though. I mean, him going 10-2, that's not going to be good enough. You win, you got to win a national title there. They just fired the guy who won a national title. It was less than 2 years within him winning the national title, and he's from there. He's one of them. Brian Kelly's from Boston.
Yeah. He looks like he's from Boston.
He does. Look, and he, you know what? Good to his credit, I think he's sincere and authentic in terms of he's not trying to be somebody else. Right. He knows who he is at 60. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. By the way, Joy, remind me to bring up Lane Kiffin to Miami. I have to go to another question first. Just remind me. Okay. We're not letting you out of here without that. Because I'm rooting for it. She's rooting for it. Nothing against Ole Miss. I want to say this about Michigan. I love college football. I do not talk it as much as I did 7 years ago because the sport's become increasingly insular. I loved this weekend. I love Michigan beating Ohio State. I love Lincoln Riley coming west because Denver West, it matters. When USC played Texas, it got a 22.5 rating. Now it gets 15s. It's not that college football is bad. It's too insular. So I watched Michigan and I thought, okay, I could take two paths on this. It's a one-off. It was cold. But as I watched them play, Bruce, I thought, you can duplicate that because they owe it. They have found an identity. Now, I'm not saying they're going to Columbus and knocking Ohio State backwards next year. But that will be what they will look like going forward. Because that looked like to me, oh, you can do that. You don't have to be the fastest team. You don't have to have Alabama receivers. Michigan's had great O-linemen, good backs, tight ends for my entire life. So your takeaway on the win, I think it's bigger than just the day. It felt identity changing and momentum changing.
This felt to me a lot like Stanford 2.0 Jim Harbaugh because it was the more physical team, as you said, really good on the offensive line. Hassan Haskins was a punishing runner who just kept moving the ball down the field. And I think what is key there is, like, give credit to Josh Gaddis, the offense coordinator. He took a lot of what his buddy Joe Moorhead had whipped Ohio State with when Oregon went in there and just had them on their heels. And there was a lot of different stuff that they couldn't handle. I don't want to say they weren't prepared for it. They just couldn't handle. The other thing that was big was Aiden Hutchinson, David Ajabo, Joshua. Those guys got after Ohio State. I mean, Aiden Hutchinson looks like he could be a legit top 5 pick. He was dominant. It's been a long time in this rivalry since Michigan had the best defensive player in the game. And there was no question they had that. So,
you know who reminded me a little bit? J.J. Watt.
Yeah, probably a slightly lighter J.J., but relentless. He's every bit as explosive.
Can't block him. He made the Ohio State's tackles, who are pros, completely overwhelmed.
It was like pretty amazing to see. Now, here's where I think Harbaugh said this after the game. He was like, I think this is the start of something. This is the beginning.
That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah. I mean, now that all of a sudden, and look, he deserves credit from this point because he got younger. Like we talked about Kelly evolving, you mentioned it, got younger. When he brought in Josh Gaddis, that was a good move. When he found Mike McDonald, nobody knew who he was other than his brother because he was on the Ravens staff. That was a brilliant addition. And I think now that they will be able to recruit, people are going to buzz about, whoa, do you see what's going on with Michigan and Jim Harbaugh? I want to go be there. I don't think you've heard that in years. And so we'll see where this goes, but they got momentum now.
No, it's you brought up something really interesting. Brian Kelly at Notre Dame is two Brian Kellys. There was a tragedy early. They couldn't kind of identify what they were. And then at some point he went, timeout. We're a Northern power. We're going to go O-line like the Cleveland Browns is the centerpiece of it. And then there's a second 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It's a different Notre Dame program. They can play with Georgia's, mostly. I think, to your point, I think Michigan feels like this year it's like, oh, okay, this is a different program now. So I'm excited for it. All right, I want to segue to this. Let's go, because I'm going to probably have you on before the games. So I want to go to the Lane Kiffin story. Lane Kiffin is different. I don't think Lane would ever fit at a Notre Dame.
Of course he wouldn't. That's nothing profound there. I mean,
even Michigan. But Miami's got a little tude. Miami's got a little coastal attitude. Miami's got a little swag. Sometimes they're borderline inappropriate. And I think, okay, Miami doesn't have the greatest facilities, nor do they pay what the big boys do. But Lane Kiffin to Miami, to me, feels absolutely right. The savior of the program. Am I nuts?
Not necessarily about this. You might be nuts about other stuff, but like this, I would say, look, Mario Cristobal has done a great job at Oregon. He is from there. He is of there. He is a Miami guy through and through. If they could get Mario Cristobal, I think that was a lot.
Can they afford him?
It depends. Is The Rock going to bring money out? I don't know who's going to. Like, where's the Miami money come from? I don't know on that, honestly. They have to sort out. They're close to, I think, having an AD in place. Remember, they're going through an AD search. If there's no Mario, I think there are some old Miami people, former Miami players, who do have some influence. They have more voice than at any other program in the country.
Okay.
There are a lot of those guys are interested in Lane, and Lane, I think, would have a hard time saying no if Miami came after him.
I think he knows it's a great fish. I fit. I know Lane well enough. In his off time, he loves to get in a boat with his kids and go fishing. He used to send me pictures when he was at that Florida job. It feels like Lane. Miami feels like Lane Kiffin. I think Brian Kelly looked like a Notre Dame football coach. It's like Brian Kelly, once he got out of the anger tunnel he was in, it was like, yeah, it kind of worked. Boston guy, Notre Dame. I mean, there are coaches that feel like schools.
Yeah, and also, by the way, you know, he's done a really good job at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss has been elevated. in the ACC, it's basically Clemson right now, and that's what you're shooting at. You don't have a lot of other stuff. Pitt had a really good year, and NC State had a decent year, but like it's there for the taking. You're going to compete against Clemson, and you don't have to go like push past like 6 other SEC heavyweights who are honestly they're better resourced than they are in Ole Miss. So that's the interesting part of that. He has a ton of social media, like a lot of the stuff that Miami, I think, buzzes about.
Yes.
It fits with him.
Yeah. All right, 1 minute left. Here's the committee last night. I tend to defend committees. I think it's hard. You're public. You get ripped. I think Oklahoma State, I said it 3 weeks ago, is the most underrated team in the country. I think they could play Georgia and make it uncomfortable, although I would take Georgia. So when you looked at the committee and you go Georgia 1 and Michigan 2 and Bama and Cincinnati and Oklahoma State and Notre Dame, I still think Ohio State would beat Notre Dame. I do not think Notre Dame has a national – they may have aspirations this year. I don't even think they're close to the top 4 or 5 teams. I think Oklahoma State would blow them out. I think Ohio State would beat them bad. Any problems with that, the group?
No, and I think, honestly, the issue for Notre Dame last week hurt them, not because they played Stanford and Stanford stinks this year, but more because Wisconsin lost to Minnesota. Well, why does that really matter that much?
That was their big one, wasn't it?
They needed Wisconsin, who they whipped early in the year, and Wisconsin had started to go on a roll. They needed Wisconsin not only to play for the Big Ten title, they needed to win it. If Wisconsin is 10-3, that would give Notre Dame a big-time win in their resume. Right now, arguably their best win is an 8-4 Purdue.
That's it.
Right? They just don't have enough.
Yep.
And I think that hurts them. I think
they were also soundly beaten at home by Cincinnati.
They were. Now, what is interesting is if Oklahoma State loses, or even if Michigan gets knocked off by Iowa, I think, or potentially Cincinnati could lose. To me, the most interesting thing right now is going to be SEC. If Georgia beats Alabama, and Alabama's a 2-loss team, I wonder how far the committee would drop them, because you got to remember, if they lose, they're a 2-loss team with one really good win. It's Ole Miss. After that, I mean, we saw them struggle badly with a bad LSU team, bad Florida team, not a good Auburn team, right? But they won those games. But if they're sitting there at 11-2, does the committee say, yeah, they're the 4th best team? Sorry, George, you got to beat them again. I don't know how the committee kind of does that.
All right. That's why it's no fun to be on committees. It's very hard. Bruce Feldman, The Athletic. We went 20 minutes on that.
You going to come out to Carson to watch our game on Fox, the Mountain West game, San Diego State, Utah State?
No. Are you deeply offended by that? I'm sorry.
No, our bosses are, though. So.
Oh, okay.
I know. You have leverage. I got it. I got it. I heard. I was listening.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd, or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.